My wife and I are blessed with wonderful children. In fact, a few weeks ago, one of our children got engaged, and yesterday my son told me that I should make sure I'm not traveling during certain dates because he wants to get engaged. So it's been a wonderful time in the Brander home. But one of the challenging and perhaps most defining moments in our lives was the loss of our daughter 19 years ago. And while we are blessed with 5 beautiful children who are amongst the living, for many years I found the most challenging question that I would be asked is, how many children do you have? Now, if I would answer 6, then the conversation would continue. They'd ask me what the children are doing, and obviously the conversation at one point would come to an immediate stop. And if I said 5, then I was afraid and concerned that I was removing my daughter from my consciousness. But I want to share with you just for a few moments, even though she only lived for a few days, the change that she inspired, particularly because of her mother. Chedva, our daughter, was born with a beta strep infection, which is an infection, a bacterial infection, which is passed from mother to child during delivery. It can be easily identified in the mother. It's easily treatable. The treatment is simply 2 bags of penicillin prior to delivery at $27 a bag. It would have made sure that the millions of dollars that was spent to try to save her life would not have been necessary. That simple test, if it was done 19 years ago, our daughter would be alive today. So after Chedva's death, we went to the OBGYN and we just asked one simple request, that every single one of his patients should be tested for beta strep. And his response was devastating. He told us that he went into obstetrics because he can't handle death and he was not going to change his practice protocols. And I remember walking out of his office more devastated than I was when we buried our daughter. My wife decided that she was going to contact other families who had gone through a similar ordeal. And she went to Tallahassee. We then lived in Florida. She went to the state capitol, met with our local state senator, who has become a wonderful friend, Robert Wexler, and began to discuss with him what happened to us and the need to create practice parameters, practice protocols. And with other mothers who had gone through a similar ordeal, they came together in a collaborative fashion, worked with other members of the State House, and Florida created a protocol for treatment when acute symptoms were present within the mother. And many years later, with the help of the CDC, mothers throughout the nation who had a similar challenge and families who had a similar devastating ordeal came together, worked with the CDC, and practice parameters, practice protocols were put into effect throughout this wonderful nation. Now, if you Google my wife's name, you will not see anything about any fancy bill signing. There was nothing that happened in the public eye. It was a bunch of wonderful, heroic women who worked together in a collaborative way to make a change within our society. But I believe that our daughter's story gives us all an insight on how we are to vision our sacred enterprises. You know, when the Jewish people moved from being a slave nation into a free people, they have 2 leaders. First, they have Moses, and then after Moses, they have Moses' prize student, Joshua. It's interesting, if you look at the Moses narratives and the Joshua narratives, you'll notice that there are multiple parallel moments in their experiences as leaders. One example is the fact that they both helped the Jewish people cross a body of water. For Moses, it is the crossing of the Yam Suf, what is known as the Red Sea. He moves the Jewish people from Egypt as slaves into the desert as free people. And Joshua helps the Jewish people cross the Jordan River, moving them from wandering desert nomads into founders of our eternal state. But although there are many similarities, there is a paradigmatic difference in the way they handle these similar experiences. For Moses, the entire crossing of the Yam Suf, of the Red Sea, is simply about moving from one place to another. It's not about the journey, it's only about the destination. For Joshua, crossing of the Jordan is all about the Jewish people journeying together. What does Moses do? He takes his miraculous staff, he hits the water, he crosses the Yam Suf, he crosses the sea, and the Jewish people follow. But Joshua, the narrative is very clear. The narrative in the Bible tells us that he brings the Jewish people together and he says, I can't do this alone. We have to cross the Jordan together. We have to journey together. The Jordan can only be split if the priests and the Levites, representatives of all the tribes, come together, and together we split the Jordan. Joshua does not have a powerful staff. He has something much stronger than a staff. Joshua has the spirit of collaboration. You know, Moses, throughout his time as leader, leads in a top-down style. And not because of ego, but simply to move the Jewish people from slaves to a people that can have a romantic rendezvous with God requires that posture of leadership. But Joshua, his leadership style is always collaborative. He always wants to remain one of the people, and he wants the people to be his partners. And it's so interesting because although Moses has an intimate relationship with God, throughout his tenure as leader, the Jewish people are always rebelling against God. And Joshua, although he does not have that same intimate relationship with God, never once as the leader do the Jewish people rebel against God in his collaborative style. You know, whether it's GE or Intel, whether it's the local synagogue or the local school, whether it is the newest cutting-edge media platforms or the conversations about philanthropic giving, the key word is collaboration. And I think that we have to ask ourselves the question, are we adopting the Joshua paradigm of leadership? Yes, it's our job to find the right professionals, to be part of our federations, to be part of our JCCs, to be part of our schools and our synagogues, to help lead our community institutions. But it's also important to realize that the professionals that we find are too educated, too mobile, too smart, and too many people want them to treat them as employees. We must treat our professionals as colleagues, and we must treat them as partners. And the greatest challenge that we have to ask ourselves, and we have to really be honest with this question and this answer, are we willing to have employees, or do we really, really need colleagues and partners to help vision our sacred enterprises? Those that have colleagues and partners, that's the game changer. They have creative institutions. They have institutions that are creating new energy for the Jewish people, new energy in the ideals of Tikkun Olam. Let's look at our boards. So many of our boards are getting older and older. Because if our boards are just about regurgitating the agenda of the leader, this generation doesn't want to be part of those board meetings. But if our board meetings start to become incubators for dialogue and for visioning, well, that's a whole different world. And that's what this generation wants to be part of. You see, our members, our families, our donors, our communities, they are our consumers. They believe in our organizations. They're even attracted to our organizations. They see our organizations as a haven and a heaven for themselves and for their families. But they don't just want to be consumers. They want to be producers. They want to help shape the vision. They want to be stakeholders in our community enterprises. This generation of leaders, of congregants, this generation of teachers and students want to be simultaneously both producers and consumers. They want to be prosumers. They want to do both. And the challenge that we need to ask ourselves is, do we really honestly, in our hearts, want to journey together with our multiple constituencies, even if that means the destination might be altered? But it's the only way that we and our organizations will remain relevant and purposeful. It is the only way that we will thrive and infuse the next generation with a purposeful Jewish gestalt. We must embrace the Joshua-esque model of leadership, empowering others to lead with us. You know, the Talmud compares Moses to a radiant sun and compares Joshua to the moon. And the Midrash, in some ways, attacks and says this shows that Joshua was not as great as Moses. I look at this Talmud and I see it totally differently. Because you know what? When you look in the morning sky and you see the sun, it is so blinding you see nothing else. But when you look in the night sky and you see the moon, boy, do those stars around the moon really shine. And that's what was Joshua's greatness, his ability to allow other people to shine with him and lead with him. You know, I take great comfort in the fact that even though we lost our daughter, I know because of the heroic work of so many mothers who worked collaboratively together, there are wonderful stars shining around this world. There are wonderful, healthy children running around this world who will never know my wife or will never know others who were involved in this, but they made a difference in their lives. The Joshua paradigm is not glamorous and it's not bold. It's not about charismatic, blinding personality, leadership, or one-off speeches. It's about the capacity to lead together. You know, Joshua composed a prayer that we recite 3 times a day. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon lakol. That we together can praise God, that we together can make a difference. And that prayer continues and says, L'takein olam b'malchut shakai. That together we can change the world. Together we can guarantee the eternality and the immortality of the Jewish people. Together we can take the values of Judaism and infuse them in the society around us. The question we just have to ask ourselves, are we willing to have the courage to embrace the Joshua paradigm and to lead collaboratively in a prosumer world? Thank you.